on a quiet street in a small town in southern Missouri, in a neighborhood where the houses are old and the trees are older, and the pace of life has not changed much in the last 40 years. There is a man who polishes a motorcycle every morning, without exception, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, rain or shine, summer or winter, holidays and birthdays and ordinary Tuesdays that have no name and no significance except that they are another day and the motorcycle needs to be polished. The man is old, not ancient, not frail, but old in the way that men in their mid-70s are old, slower than they used to be, stiffer in the mornings, a little thinner than they were 10 years ago, with hands that have begun to show the particular knobby quality that comes from decades of physical work. His hair is white and thin and combed straight back from his forehead. His face is lined with the deep creases that come from a lifetime of sun and wind and squinting at bright things. His eyes are a pale blue that has faded slightly over the decades, the way blue eyes sometimes do, becoming softer and lighter with age, until they are almost the color of a winter sky on a day when the clouds are very high and very thin. His name is Walter Novak. He has lived in this house on this street for the last 31 years. Before that, he lived in another house, in another town, in another state, in another chapter of his life that ended when this chapter began. But that was a long time ago. That was before the motorcycle. That was before the polishing. That was before the quiet settled over Walter's life like a soft blanket and stayed. The house is a small one-story structure with white clapboard siding and dark green shutters and a concrete front porch with a single metal railing. The lawn is always mowed. The hedges are always trimmed. The gutters are always clean. Walter maintains the house the way he maintains everything, carefully, patiently, without complaint. Because the maintaining of things is the rhythm of his days, and without that rhythm the days would be shapeless, and the shapelessness would be unbearable. Behind the house, accessible through a narrow concrete driveway that runs along the left side of the property, is a single-car garage. The garage is old, older than Walter's time in the house, probably built in the 1950s when the house was built. It is made of concrete block, painted the same white as the house, with a single wooden door that swings upward on a set of springs and metal tracks. The door has a row of small glass windows at the top, each one about 6 inches square, that let light into the garage when the door is closed. Inside the garage, there is a motorcycle. It is a Harley-Davidson, a 1972 Electra Glide, the same model and the same year as the bike James Finch rode across America, though Walter does not know James Finch, has never heard his story. The Electra Glide is a big motorcycle, one of Harley-Davidson's largest touring models, designed for long-distance riding, with a big V-twin engine and a wide, comfortable seat and hard saddlebags and a tall windshield. It weighs about 750 pounds fully loaded. It is not a beginner's motorcycle. It is a motorcycle built for a person who knows how to ride and who intends to ride far. The Electra Glide in Walter's garage is a deep midnight blue, not black, blue. The difference is only visible in certain lights. In the fluorescent glow of the garage's single overhead tube, the bike looks black. But when the garage door is open and the morning sun comes in at a low angle, the blue reveals itself. A deep, rich blue, like the sky at the very last moment of twilight, when the day is almost gone but the night has not quite arrived. The blue is the color of the space between things, the color of endings and beginnings, the color of something that is beautiful precisely because it is impossible to hold on to. The chrome on the Electra Glide is immaculate. This is not an exaggeration. The chrome on this motorcycle is flawless in a way that chrome on a 52-year-old motorcycle should not be flawless. The exhaust pipes gleam. The engine cases gleam. The handlebar clamps gleam. The mirrors gleam. The small chrome accents on the saddlebags gleam. Every piece of chrome on the motorcycle looks like it was installed yesterday. And the reason it looks like that is because Walter polishes every single piece of it every single morning. The garage is Walter's workshop. It is a small space, maybe 12 feet wide and 20 feet deep. But it is organized with a precision that borders on the ceremonial. A long wooden workbench runs along the right wall, and on the workbench, arranged in exact positions that have not changed in years, are the tools and supplies Walter uses for his daily polishing. A stack of soft cotton cloths, folded into perfect squares, each one clean and white. A can of chrome polish, Mother's brand, the kind with the yellow cap, always at least half full, because Walter buys a new can before the old one runs out. A bottle of leather conditioner for the seat and the saddlebags. A small tin of black wax for the painted surfaces. A spray bottle of glass cleaner for the mirrors and the windshield. A soft bristle brush for the spoked wheels. A compressed air canister for blowing dust out of the crevices between the engine fins. Above the workbench, on a pegboard that Walter installed himself, hang a few hand tools, a set of wrenches, a screwdriver, a pair of pliers, a socket set. Though Walter rarely uses them, the motorcycle does not need mechanical work. The motorcycle runs perfectly. The engine turns over on the first press of the starter button every time, because Walter starts it once a week on Saturday mornings and lets it idle for exactly 15 minutes to keep the battery charged and the oil circulating and the seals from drying out. He doesn't ride it during these Saturday starts. He just starts it, sits on the stool beside the workbench, listens to the engine idle for 15 minutes, and then shuts it off. The sound of the Electra Glide idling in the closed garage, the deep, slow rumble of the big V-twin, reverberating off the concrete block walls, fills the small space completely, like the heartbeat of a large sleeping animal. Every morning at exactly 6:45, Walter walks out the back door of his house, down the 3 concrete steps to the backyard, across the short concrete path to the garage, and pushes the garage door up on its springs. The door rises with a soft metallic groan, the kind of sound that old garage doors make when they have been opening and closing for decades and have developed their own particular voice. Morning light floods into the garage. The motorcycle, sitting in the center of the floor, catches the light on its chrome surfaces and sends small bright reflections dancing across the concrete block walls. Walter stands in the doorway for a moment. He looks at the motorcycle. This is the first thing he does every morning. He looks at it, not a quick glance, a real look, a slow, careful, attentive look, the way a person looks at something they love. His pale blue eyes move over the machine slowly, from the front wheel to the windshield to the handlebars, to the tank to the engine, to the seat to the saddlebags to the rear wheel. He is not checking for problems. He is not inspecting for damage. He is just looking. The way you look at a painting you have seen 1,000 times, but that still moves you. The way you look at a photograph of someone you loved. Then he walks to the workbench. He picks up the first cloth, always the same cloth first, the one he uses for the chrome. He picks up the can of Mother's chrome polish. He shakes the can gently. He applies a small amount of polish to the cloth, and he begins. He starts with the exhaust pipes. Always the exhaust pipes first. The pipes are the lowest part of the motorcycle, the closest to the ground, the most likely to have accumulated a thin film of dust overnight. Walter crouches slowly, his knees popping softly the way old knees do, and begins to work the cloth along the right exhaust pipe, starting at the engine and moving toward the rear. His movements are slow and rhythmic and completely without hurry. The cloth moves in small circles, applying the polish, spreading it, buffing it, until the chrome underneath begins to glow. Then, he moves the cloth a few inches further down the pipe and repeats the process. Each section of pipe gets the same treatment, the same amount of time, the same number of circles, the same careful attention. The polishing takes about an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours if Walter is being particularly thorough, which he usually is. He polishes the exhaust pipes, then the engine cases, then the handlebar clamps, then the mirrors, then the chrome accents on the saddlebags, then the chrome trim on the fenders, then the spokes of the wheels, 1 spoke at a time, 40 spokes per wheel, 80 spokes total. Then the small chrome details that most people would never notice, the hinge of the seat latch, the bezel around the headlight, the small ring at the base of the kickstand. After the chrome, he moves to the painted surfaces. He takes a different cloth, softer, the one reserved for paint, and a small tin of black wax. He applies the wax to the tank first, working in long, smooth strokes, following the curves of the metal, feeling the shape of the tank under the cloth the way a sculptor feels the shape of a stone. The midnight blue paint, already gleaming, becomes even deeper and richer under the wax. The color seems to darken and brighten at the same time, as if the wax is waking it up. He waxes the fenders, the saddlebag lids, the small triangular side panels below the seat. Every painted surface gets the same treatment, the same cloth, the same wax, the same slow, patient strokes. Then the leather. He takes a third cloth, this one slightly damp, and the bottle of leather conditioner. He applies the conditioner to the seat first, working it into the leather with his fingertips, feeling the grain of the hide, feeling the small creases and the small smooth spots, and the particular texture that only old, well-maintained leather has. The seat is original. It has been on the motorcycle since 1972. It should, by all rights, be cracked and dried and falling apart. But it is not. It is supple and smooth and deeply brown, because Walter has been conditioning it every morning for decades, feeding the leather with oil and attention, keeping it alive the way you keep any living thing alive, by paying attention to it every single day, without fail. After the leather, he cleans the windshield and the mirrors with glass cleaner and a fourth cloth. After the glass, he brushes the wheel spokes with the soft bristle brush, removing any remaining dust that the polishing cloth might have missed. After the spokes, he uses the compressed air canister to blow dust out of the narrow spaces between the engine cooling fins, where dust likes to accumulate and where cloths cannot reach. When he is finished, when every surface has been polished and waxed and conditioned and cleaned and brushed and blown, Walter steps back from the motorcycle and looks at it again. The same slow, careful look he gave it when he first opened the garage door. He is checking his work, making sure he hasn't missed anything, making sure every surface is as clean and as bright as he can make it. Then he puts the cloths back on the workbench in their exact positions. He puts the polish and the wax and the conditioner and the cleaner back in their exact positions. He hangs the brush on its hook. He sets the compressed air canister upright on the shelf. Everything back where it belongs. Everything ready for tomorrow. He stands in the garage for another few minutes, looking at the motorcycle in the morning light. The Electra Glide sits on its kickstand, perfectly still, perfectly clean, perfectly beautiful. The chrome catches the light. The midnight blue paint glows. The leather seat is warm and rich and brown. The whole machine looks like it could be ridden out of the garage and onto the highway at any moment, without a single adjustment, without a single repair, without a single thing needing to be done to it before it could carry a rider 1,000 miles. But it will not be ridden. It has not been ridden in a very long time. How long exactly is a question that only Walter knows the answer to, and Walter does not talk about it. The motorcycle sits in the garage, perfect and still, like a museum piece that is maintained by a devoted curator who never lets anyone touch it and never opens the exhibit to the public. Walter pulls the garage door down. The springs groan softly. The door settles into its frame. The small glass windows at the top of the door let a few rectangles of light into the dark garage, falling on the motorcycle's tank and windshield. Then Walter walks back across the concrete path to his house. He goes inside. He closes the back door. The morning polishing is done. He will do the same thing tomorrow. And the day after. And the day after that. He will do it until he cannot do it anymore. He will do it until his hands are too stiff and his knees are too sore, and his body can no longer crouch beside the exhaust pipes and move the cloth in its slow, careful circles. And when that day comes, the day when Walter can no longer polish the motorcycle, he does not know what he will do. He has not thought about it. He does not want to think about it. The polishing is not a choice. The polishing is a necessity. The polishing is the thing that gets Walter out of bed every morning, the thing that gives shape to his days, the thing that keeps him tethered to the world. Without the polishing, Walter does not know who he is. The neighbors on the street have watched this routine for years. Most of them have stopped noticing it, the way people stop noticing the things that happen every day. The sun rises, the mail comes. Walter polishes his motorcycle. These are facts of the neighborhood, as unremarkable and as reliable as gravity. A few of the newer residents, the younger families who have moved onto the street in the last 5 or 10 years, find it mildly interesting. A few of them have commented on it to each other, over backyard fences, in the casual way that neighbors comment on each other's habits. Have you noticed the old man with the motorcycle? Yeah, he's out there every morning. Does he ever ride it? I've never seen him ride it. Huh. And then the conversation moves on to something else, and Walter's routine recedes back into the general background of the neighborhood's daily life. But there is one neighbor who has not stopped noticing. One neighbor who watches Walter's routine every morning with a quiet, steady curiosity that has been building slowly for the last 2 years, like water rising behind a dam. His name is David. He lives in the house next door to Walter's on the left side. He is 34 years old. He moved into the house 2 years ago with his wife, Rachel, and their daughter, Sophie, who is 7. David is a high school history teacher. He teaches American history to 11th graders at the regional high school, about 15 miles away. He is the kind of teacher who cares about his students and who believes that history is not just a collection of dates and names, but a collection of stories, and that the stories matter because they tell us who we are and how we got here and what we might become. David noticed Walter's routine on his first morning in the new house. He was standing at the kitchen window drinking coffee, looking at the backyard, getting used to the view, when he saw the old man walk out of the house next door and open the garage door and begin to polish a motorcycle. David watched for a few minutes, the way you watch anything that is happening within your field of vision at 6:45 in the morning when you are drinking your first cup of coffee and your brain is not yet fully engaged. He noted the motorcycle. He noted the polishing. He noted the slowness and the care with which the old man worked. And then he went about his day. The next morning he saw it again, and the next morning, and the next. Within a week, Walter's routine had become part of David's morning. Coffee, window, Walter, motorcycle, polish. It was oddly comforting. There was something about watching a person do something with such devotion and such patience that made David feel better about the world. In a world where everything seemed to be moving faster and getting louder and becoming more complicated, there was an old man next door who spent 2 hours every morning polishing a motorcycle. He never rode. There was something almost sacred about it. Something David could not quite explain, but could not stop watching. After about 6 months, David began to wonder, not casually, not idly, but genuinely, persistently, in the back of the mind way that certain questions lodge themselves in a person's consciousness and refuse to leave. Why does he polish it every morning? Why does he never ride it? What is the motorcycle to him? What is the story? David is a history teacher. He lives for stories. He believes that every person is a walking archive of stories, and that the best stories are the ones that have never been told, because they are still living inside the people who carry them. And he looks at Walter, a quiet old man who lives alone in a white house, with green shutters on a quiet street in a small Missouri town. And he sees a story. He can feel it. The way a historian feels the presence of a story in an old building or an old photograph or an old letter. The story is there. It is inside the motorcycle. It is inside the polishing. It is inside the silence that surrounds Walter like a force field, keeping everyone at a comfortable distance, allowing the routine to continue, undisturbed. David wants to know the story, but David is also a polite man, raised by polite parents, and he knows that you do not walk up to an old man and ask him why he polishes a motorcycle every morning. You do not intrude on a person's ritual. You do not demand the story. You wait. You watch. You let the story come to you if it wants to come. And if it doesn't want to come, you respect that too. So David watches and waits and drinks his coffee at the kitchen window every morning, watching Walter walk to the garage, open the door, and begin the slow, careful work of polishing a midnight blue Harley-Davidson Electra Glide that has not been ridden in years, and the question sits in the back of David's mind, patient and steady, growing a little louder with each passing day. Why does he never ride it? David's curiosity did not lead him to do anything dramatic. He did not knock on Walter's door and introduce himself with a list of questions. He did not peer over the fence or sneak into the garage. He did what patient people do when they are curious about something. He waited for the natural opportunities that come from living next door to someone. And he took them gently, one at a time, without pushing. The first opportunity came about 3 months after David moved in. It was a Saturday morning in late October. David was raking leaves in his front yard. The old maple tree that stood between his property and Walter's dropped an enormous number of leaves every autumn. And the raking was a weekend ritual that David actually enjoyed, because it gave him time to think and time to be outside, and time to tire his body in the simple, honest way that yard work tires a body. Walter was in his own front yard, doing the same thing. A different rake, a different pile, but the same leaves from the same tree, falling on both sides of the property line with complete disregard for the boundaries that humans draw on pieces of paper. David raked for a while. Walter raked for a while. They worked in parallel, about 30 feet apart, separated by the low chain-link fence that ran between their properties. Neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the scratch of the rakes on the grass and the soft rustle of the leaves being gathered, and the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere, a few streets over. After about 20 minutes, David walked to the fence. He leaned the rake against it. He looked at Walter, who was bending slowly to pick up a handful of leaves that had escaped the pile. "Morning," David said. Walter straightened up. He looked at David. His pale blue eyes were calm and unhurried. He did not seem surprised or annoyed by the greeting. He seemed like a man who had been expecting it sooner or later, because that is what neighbors do. They talk to each other eventually, even the quiet ones. "Morning," Walter said. "I'm David. We moved in a few months ago. I've been meaning to come over and introduce myself." "Walter," Walter said. He did not extend his hand because his hands were full of leaves, but he nodded, and the nod was warm enough to count as a handshake. "Nice neighborhood," David said. "It is," Walter said. "Quiet. That's what we like about it. We've got a 7-year-old. The quiet is good." Walter nodded. He set the handful of leaves on top of his pile. He leaned on his rake for a moment, the way older men lean on rakes, using the handle as a support, shifting his weight, giving his back a rest. 7, Walter said. "That's a good age." "It is. She's in 2nd grade. Sophie." Walter nodded again. He looked at David's house. He looked back at David. His face was pleasant but reserved, the face of a man who is willing to be polite, but who does not volunteer information about himself. The face of a man who has learned over many years that most conversations can be navigated with nods and short sentences, and the occasional question that redirects the focus back to the other person. They talked for about 5 minutes. Small things. The weather, the leaves, the neighborhood. The fact that the mailman had been coming later and later every week and nobody knew why. David did most of the talking. Walter did most of the listening, but the listening was genuine. Walter's eyes stayed on David's face the whole time, and he nodded at the right moments, and he made small sounds of acknowledgement that told David he was being heard. At the end of the conversation, David said, "Well, I should get back to these leaves." Walter said, "Me too." They both went back to raking. The conversation was over, but something had been started. A small thread of connection between two neighbors who had been living 30 feet apart for 3 months without speaking. Over the following weeks, the small conversations continued, always brief, always casual, always initiated by David, because Walter was not the kind of man who initiated conversations. David would see Walter in the front yard, or at the mailbox, or walking to his truck in the driveway, and he would say good morning, or make a comment about the weather, or ask a simple question about something in the neighborhood. Walter would respond politely, briefly, and then the conversation would end, and they would go their separate ways. David learned a few small things about Walter during these exchanges. He learned that Walter had lived in the house for 31 years. He learned that Walter had been a machinist at a factory that made precision parts for the aerospace industry, and that he had retired about 12 years ago. He learned that Walter was originally from somewhere in the Midwest. Walter did not specify where, and David did not push. He learned that Walter's wife had passed away. Walter mentioned it once, briefly in the context of saying that the house was too big for one person, but too full of memories to leave. And then he changed the subject, and David understood that the subject was not open for further discussion. David did not mention the motorcycle, not once. He wanted to. The question was always there, sitting at the back of his mind, rising to the tip of his tongue and then retreating. But he did not ask. It was too soon. The thread of connection between them was too thin. If David pulled on it too hard, it would break, and Walter would retreat behind his silence, and the chance to learn the story would be gone. So, David waited. He watched Walter's morning routine through the kitchen window. He drank his coffee. He saw the garage door open at 6:45. He saw the morning light flood in. He saw the chrome flash. He saw Walter crouch beside the exhaust pipes with his soft white cloth. He saw the slow, patient circles. He saw the whole 2-hour ritual unfold, day after day, week after week, through the autumn and into the winter and into the spring. Rachel, David's wife, noticed his watching. She was a perceptive woman. She noticed the way David stood at the kitchen window a little longer than necessary every morning, his coffee growing cold in his hand, his eyes focused on the garage next door. "You're watching him again," she said one morning in February, standing behind him with her own cup of coffee. "I can't help it," David said. "There's a story there, Rach. I can feel it. Maybe it's a private story. Maybe. Probably, but it's there." Rachel looked out the window. Walter was in his garage, polishing the chrome engine cases of the Electra Glide. His movements were slow and steady and rhythmic, like a meditation. "He never rides it," Rachel said. "Never. Not once since we moved in. Maybe he can't ride anymore. Maybe he's too old. He's not that old. He's in his 70s. Plenty of men in their 70s still ride. Maybe he's afraid. He doesn't look afraid. He looks like a man who loves that motorcycle more than almost anything in the world. So why doesn't he ride it? That's the question." They stood together at the window for a few minutes, watching Walter work. Sophie came into the kitchen still in her pajamas, her hair tangled from sleep. She climbed onto a chair and looked out the window too. "What are we looking at?" Sophie asked. "Mr. Novak is polishing his motorcycle," David said. Sophie watched for a moment. "He does that every morning," she said. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the matter-of-fact clarity that 7-year-olds bring to their observations of the adult world. "He does," David said. "Why?" "I don't know, sweetheart." "Why don't you ask him?" David smiled. The directness of children. The beautiful, uncomplicated directness. "Maybe I will someday," he said. Spring arrived. The leaves came back on the old maple tree. The grass turned green. The neighborhood woke up from its winter sleep. People emerged from their houses and began to work in their yards and walk their dogs and sit on their porches in the evenings. David began to see Walter more often. Walter was outside more in the spring, mowing his lawn, trimming his hedges, sitting on his front porch in the late afternoons with a glass of water, watching the street. The conversations between them became slightly longer, slightly less formal, slightly more relaxed. David talked about his teaching. Walter listened with genuine interest. Walter talked briefly about his years as a machinist, about the precision involved, about the satisfaction of making a part that fit perfectly, about the way good metalwork was a kind of art that most people never noticed because it happened inside machines where nobody could see it. David found this fascinating. He found Walter fascinating, in the quiet, understated way that certain people are fascinating, not because they demand attention, but because the attention they don't demand is so clearly deserved. One afternoon in April, David was mowing his lawn when Sophie came running out of the house and across the yard, chasing a yellow butterfly that had been circling the flower bed near the fence. The butterfly flew over the fence into Walter's yard. Sophie stopped at the fence, watching the butterfly land on a bush on Walter's side. Walter was sitting on his porch. He had been watching Sophie chase the butterfly with a small smile on his face, the particular soft smile that certain older people get when they watch small children do things that are pure and unself-conscious and full of the particular energy that only childhood contains. "You can come get it if you want," Walter said to Sophie. His voice was gentle, softer than David had ever heard it. Sophie looked at David, who was standing nearby with the lawnmower. David nodded. Sophie opened the small gate in the fence and walked into Walter's yard. She walked slowly toward the bush where the butterfly was resting. She crouched down. She watched the butterfly for about 30 seconds, her face close to the bush, her eyes wide, her breath held so as not to disturb it. Then the butterfly lifted off the bush and flew away over Walter's roof and disappeared. Sophie stood up. She looked at Walter on the porch. "It flew away," she said. "They always do," Walter said. "But they come back." Sophie walked closer to the porch. She was not a shy child. She was the kind of child who talked to adults the same way she talked to other children, directly, openly, without any awareness that there was supposed to be a barrier between them. "Mr. Novak, can I see your motorcycle?" David's heart stopped for a second. Not literally, but the small jolt of anxiety that a parent feels when their child asks something that might be inappropriate shot through his chest. He was about to redirect Sophie, to tell her that Mr. Novak's garage was private, that they shouldn't bother him. But before he could speak, Walter answered. "Sure," Walter said, simply, without hesitation. He stood up from his porch chair. He walked slowly down the steps. He walked around the side of the house toward the garage with Sophie walking beside him, her small steps matching his slow ones. David followed behind, pushing the lawnmower to the side of the yard and leaving it there. Walter reached the garage. He bent down and gripped the handle of the garage door. He pulled it up. The springs groaned. The door rose. The morning light, late morning now, almost noon, flooded into the small space. And there it was, the Electra Glide, midnight blue and chrome, perfect and still and gleaming, the way it always gleamed, the way it gleamed every morning after Walter's 2 hours of careful, devoted work. Sophie stood in the doorway of the garage and looked at the motorcycle. Her eyes were wide. Her mouth was slightly open. She had seen motorcycles before, on television, in pictures on the street. But she had never been this close to one. She had never been in a garage with one. She had never smelled the particular smell of a well-maintained motorcycle in an enclosed space. The leather, the chrome polish, the faint trace of gasoline, the warm mineral smell of old concrete. "It's so pretty," Sophie said. Walter looked at the motorcycle. He looked at Sophie. Something moved across his face, something fast and subtle, like a cloud passing across the sun. A flicker of emotion that was there, and then gone, replaced by the same calm, steady expression he always wore. "Thank you," he said. "Her name is Evangeline." David, standing behind Sophie in the driveway, heard this. The motorcycle had a name. Her name is Evangeline. Not it. Her. The motorcycle was not an object to Walter. The motorcycle was something else. Something with a name. Something that was referred to with a pronoun reserved for living things. "Evangeline," Sophie repeated, tasting the word. "That's a long name." "It is," Walter said. "But she's a long motorcycle." Sophie laughed. A bright, clear laugh. The kind of laugh that only children can produce. The kind that sounds like sunlight converted into sound. Walter smiled at the laugh. A real smile this time. Not the small, polite smile he gave to neighbors over the fence. A real smile that reached his eyes and changed the shape of his face and made him look, for just a second, younger than his years. Sophie walked into the garage. She walked slowly around the motorcycle, looking at it from every angle, the way a child examines something new and wonderful. She crouched down and looked at the engine. She stood on her toes and looked at the windshield. She touched the leather seat with one finger, very gently. The way you touch something you have been told is precious. Can I sit on it? She asked. Walter was quiet for a moment. A longer moment than David expected. Walter looked at the motorcycle. He looked at Sophie. He looked at the motorcycle again. Okay, he said. His voice was slightly different now, slightly tighter, as if the word had to pass through something narrow on its way out. He lifted Sophie gently and set her on the seat. She was very small on the big motorcycle. Her feet did not come close to the foot pegs. Her hands could barely reach the handlebars. She sat there on the wide leather seat, holding the grips with her small hands, and she grinned the grin of a 7-year-old who is sitting on a motorcycle for the first time in her life, and who believes in this moment that she is the coolest person in the entire world. Vroom, vroom, Sophie said quietly, making engine noises with her mouth. Walter watched her. His face did something complicated. The smile was still there, but underneath the smile, something else was moving, something deeper, something that David could see but could not name, an emotion that was too old and too private and too deeply buried to have a simple name, an emotion that lived in the same place inside Walter where the motorcycle lived, in the deep, quiet center of a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time. Walter's eyes were wet, not crying, just wet. The particular wetness that comes when something you see in the present moment connects to something you remember from the past, and the connection sends a small electrical charge through the wiring of your heart. David saw the wetness. He saw it clearly because he was standing right behind Walter, looking over the old man's shoulder at his own daughter sitting on a motorcycle in a garage. And in that moment, David understood something that he had not understood before. The story was not about the motorcycle. The story was about who used to sit on it. David did not say anything. He did not ask. He just stood there, behind Walter, watching Sophie make engine noises on the Electra Glide. And he felt the weight of the unasked question settle into the space between them like a stone dropping into deep water. After about a minute, Walter lifted Sophie off the motorcycle. He set her gently on the concrete floor of the garage. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Novak," in her bright, clear voice. And Walter said, "You're welcome, sweetheart," in his quiet, rough voice. And Sophie ran back through the gate to her own yard, chasing another butterfly or an imaginary one. And Walter pulled the garage door down and walked back to his porch and sat in his chair and looked at the street for a long time without moving. David went back to mowing his lawn, but he was not thinking about the lawn. He was thinking about the wetness in Walter's eyes. He was thinking about the name Evangeline. He was thinking about the way Walter's voice had tightened when Sophie asked to sit on the motorcycle, as if the question had touched something inside him that was still tender after many years. That evening, after Sophie was in bed, David sat at the kitchen table with Rachel and told her what had happened. He told her about the name, Evangeline. He told her about Walter's face when Sophie sat on the motorcycle. He told her about the wetness in the old man's eyes. Rachel listened. She was quiet for a while after David finished. "He named the motorcycle," she said. "He named the motorcycle. People name boats. People name cars sometimes. People name guitars. This felt different. This felt like the name meant something. Something specific. Not just a nickname for a machine. A real name. A person's name." Rachel looked at David. She could see the question in his eyes, the same question that had been building for 2 years. "You want to know the story," she said. "I need to know the story. Then be patient. He'll tell you when he's ready. If he's ever ready." David nodded. He knew Rachel was right. He knew that the story could not be extracted. It could not be demanded. It could only be given freely by the person who carried it, when the person who carried it decided that the weight of carrying it alone was greater than the risk of sharing it. David would wait. He had been waiting for 2 years. He could wait longer. The question was patient. The question had nowhere else to go. But something had changed after Sophie sat on the motorcycle. Something in the space between David and Walter had shifted. A door had opened, just slightly. Not enough to see through, but enough to feel the air coming through it. The warm air of a story that was ready to be told. If the right person asked in the right way at the right time, David would find the right time. He did not know when, but he would find it. And when he found it, he would listen the way he had been watching, carefully, patiently, without hurry, without judgment, with the full attention of a man who understood that the best stories are the ones that take the longest to tell. The right time came on a Sunday afternoon in late May. The kind of Sunday that only exists in the rural Midwest in late spring. Warm but not hot, breezy but not windy, bright but not harsh. The kind of Sunday when the air smells like cut grass and lilac bushes and the particular sweet warmth of soil that has been absorbing sunlight all morning. The kind of Sunday when time itself seems to slow down and stretch out, as if the day knows it has nothing scheduled and is content to take its time getting to evening. David was sitting on his front porch reading a book. Rachel was inside with Sophie, doing something in the kitchen. David could hear their voices through the screen door. The bright, quick voice of a 7-year-old and the calm, warm voice of a mother, intertwined in the easy way that mothers and daughters talk when they are doing something together that does not require concentration. Walter came out of his house. He walked down his porch steps slowly. He stood in his front yard for a moment, looking at the sky. Then he walked to the fence between the two properties. He stood at the fence. He looked at David. This was unusual. Walter did not come to the fence. Walter did not initiate contact. In 2 years of living next door to each other, David had always been the one to approach. Walter had always been the one who responded. For Walter to come to the fence, unsolicited, and stand there looking at David was something that had never happened before. David set his book down. He stood up. He walked across the yard to the fence. Afternoon, Walter. Afternoon. Walter was quiet for a moment. He looked at the fence. He looked at his hands, which were resting on the top rail. His hands were clean. They were always clean by this time of day. The morning polish long finished, but they had the particular roughness of hands that work every day, even if the work is only polishing chrome with a soft cloth. "David," Walter said, "I was wondering if you wanted to come over for a cup of coffee." David felt something inside his chest, not the jolt of anxiety he had felt when Sophie asked to sit on the motorcycle. Something different. Something quieter. The feeling of a door opening. The feeling of being invited into a room that had been locked for a very long time. "I'd like that," David said. He followed Walter around the fence and through Walter's front gate, and up the porch steps and through the front door of Walter's house. It was the first time David had been inside. The house was exactly what David expected, and completely different from what David expected. Both at the same time. It was clean, immaculately clean. The kind of clean that comes from a person who has been living alone for many years and has channeled their energy into the maintenance of their immediate environment. The floors were polished hardwood. The furniture was old but well cared for. A dark green sofa, 2 wooden chairs with cushions, a small coffee table with a glass top, a bookshelf filled with books, and a few small frame photographs. The walls were painted a soft cream color. The curtains were white. Everything was in its place. Everything had been in its place for a long time. But the house was also full. Not cluttered. Walter was not a man who accumulated clutter, but full in the sense that every object in the house seemed to have been chosen deliberately and placed deliberately and kept deliberately. The bookshelf held maybe 50 books, westerns mostly and a few histories, and a few books about motorcycles and engines. The coffee table held a single magazine, a motorcycle magazine from several months ago, open to an article about engine restoration. A small wooden clock on the mantel ticked softly. A few plants, succulents, the kind that survive with almost no water, sat on the windowsills in small ceramic pots. And the photographs. There were photographs throughout the house, but not many. Maybe a dozen in small frames arranged on the bookshelf and the mantel and a small side table near the hallway. David glanced at them as he walked through the living room. He saw Walter as a younger man, dark-haired, strong-jawed, standing in front of a factory building in work clothes. He saw a woman, dark-haired, smiling, pretty in an unassuming way, standing in a garden with flowers behind her. He saw Walter and the woman together, standing beside a motorcycle, the Electra Glide. David realized, though, it looked newer in the photograph, shinier, as if it had just been bought. He saw a few other photographs, a family gathering, a Christmas tree, a dog. Walter led David to the kitchen. The kitchen was small and tidy, with a wooden table and 2 chairs and a window that looked out at the backyard and, beyond the backyard, the garage. The garage door was closed. The motorcycle was inside, invisible, but present, always present, the way gravity is present, even when you can't see it. Walter poured 2 cups of coffee from a drip coffee maker on the counter, black for himself. He looked at David. "Black," David said. Walter set the cups on the table. They sat down across from each other. The kitchen was quiet. The clock on the living room mantel ticked softly, audible through the doorway. The afternoon light came through the kitchen window at a warm angle, falling on the table between them. They drank coffee for a few minutes without speaking. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people who are preparing for something. The silence before a conversation that both of them know is coming, and neither of them wants to rush. Walter set his cup down. He looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He looked up at David. "You've been wondering about the motorcycle," Walter said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement. Walter had known for a long time that David was curious. He had seen David watching from the kitchen window. He had felt the questions behind David's polite small talk at the fence. He had sensed the curiosity the way a person senses someone looking at them from across a room. And he had decided at some point, today or yesterday or last week, or perhaps much longer ago, that it was time. "Yes," David said, simply, honestly, without pretending he hadn't been curious. Walter nodded. He picked up his coffee. He took a slow sip. He set it down. He looked at the kitchen window, at the garage beyond the backyard, at the closed door behind which the midnight blue Electra Glide sat in its permanent, perfect stillness. "Her name was Evangeline," Walter said. David felt the shift in the room immediately. The word "her" was not referring to the motorcycle this time. The word "her" was referring to something else, someone else. The name that Walter had given the motorcycle was not the motorcycle's name. It was someone's name, a person's name. And the motorcycle carried that name the way a ship carries the name of the person it was christened for. Not because the ship is the person, but because the person mattered so much that their name was given to the most important thing the namer owned. Evangeline was my daughter, Walter said. The kitchen was very quiet. The clock ticked. The coffee maker made a small gurgling sound as the last water in the reservoir heated and evaporated. The afternoon light shifted slightly on the table, moving a fraction of an inch as the sun continued its slow arc across the sky. She died in 1991, Walter said. She was 27 years old. Walter paused. He looked at his coffee cup. He turned it slowly in his hands, a quarter turn, feeling the warm ceramic under his fingers. His face was calm. His voice was steady. He was speaking the way a man speaks when he has rehearsed something in his mind for a very long time and has finally, after years of rehearsal, decided to say it out loud. Evangeline loved motorcycles, Walter said. She loved them from the time she was a little girl. She used to sit on my lap in the garage while I worked on my bikes. I had a few over the years before the Electra Glide, and she would watch everything I did and ask 1,000 questions. How does the engine work? Why do the pipes get hot? What does the clutch do? How fast can it go? She was 4 years old asking me about compression ratios. She was 6 years old asking me about valve timing. Walter smiled, a small, slow smile. The smile of a man remembering something that was good before it became something that was painful. When she was 16, I taught her to ride on a small Honda, a CB 350. We bought it used from a man at the shop where I worked. Evangeline learned fast. She was a natural. Better than me, honestly. She had better balance, better instincts. She could feel the bike in a way that I never could. She rode that little Honda for 2 years, and then she saved up money from her job at the drugstore and bought herself a bigger bike, a Yamaha 650. And she rode that for a few years. And then, when she was 24, she told me she wanted a Harley. Walter paused again. He looked at the window. I told her Harleys were too big for her. She was a small woman, 5'4", 120 pounds. The Electra Glide weighs 750 pounds. I told her she'd never be able to handle it. She told me I was wrong. She told me she had been riding for 8 years, and she could handle anything on 2 wheels. And she was right. She was always right about things like that. She knew her own abilities better than I knew them. He took a sip of coffee. So we bought the Electra Glide together. The one in the garage, 1972 model. We found it at a dealer in Kansas City, midnight blue. The moment she saw the color, she said, "That's the one, Dad." She didn't look at any other bike. She didn't compare prices. She didn't ask about features. She just saw the color and she knew. That was Evangeline. She made decisions with her whole heart, all at once. And she was almost never wrong. Walter's voice was steady, remarkably steady. He was telling this story the way he polished the motorcycle. Slowly, carefully, one piece at a time, with the patient attention of a man who has been preparing for this moment for a very long time. We bought the bike. We rode it home together. She rode the Electra Glide, and I rode my old Sportster beside her. 2 hours on the highway, side by side. She was grinning the whole way. I could see it in my mirror. The biggest grin I'd ever seen on her face, and I had seen a lot of big grins from that girl. Walter looked at David. His pale blue eyes were clear and steady. That was 1972. She was 24. For the next 3 years, she rode that motorcycle everywhere. To work, to the grocery store, to see friends, on long weekend rides through the Ozark Hills. She put about 30,000 miles on it in 3 years. She took care of it the way I taught her, Oil changes, chain adjustments, tire checks, all of it. She kept it clean. She kept it running. She loved that motorcycle the way some people love a horse or a dog or a best friend. Walter paused. A longer pause this time. The clock ticked. The light shifted. In 1975, Evangeline married a man named Michael. A good man. A carpenter. They had met at a county fair the summer before. Michael didn't ride motorcycles. He drove a truck. But he understood that the motorcycle was important to Evangeline, and he never asked her to stop riding. He never complained about it. He just accepted it as part of who she was. That's one of the things I liked most about Michael. He understood that you don't ask a person to stop being who they are just because it makes you nervous. Walter took another sip of coffee. They were happy. They were genuinely happy. They moved into a small house about 10 miles from here. Michael built furniture and a shop behind the house. Evangeline worked as a nurse at the county hospital. She rode the Electra Glide to work every day, rain or shine, spring through fall. She only stopped riding in the winter when the roads got icy. Even then, she'd go out to the garage every morning and sit on the motorcycle for a few minutes, the way some people sit in a favorite chair, just to be near it, just to feel the leather and the chrome and the shape of the thing she loved. Walter looked at the table. He was quiet for about 30 seconds. David did not speak. David understood that the story was approaching something, and that the something was going to be difficult, and that the best thing he could do was sit quietly and let Walter get there at his own pace. In 1978, Evangeline had a baby, a girl. They named her Claire, named after Michael's mother. Claire was a beautiful baby, healthy, loud, the kind of baby who announces her presence in every room she enters. Evangeline was a wonderful mother. She was patient and warm and funny, and she sang to Claire every night before bed, old songs that my wife used to sing, songs that had been in our family for generations. Walter paused again. His hands were still on the coffee cup, but they were not moving anymore. They were perfectly still. When Claire was about 18 months old, Evangeline started riding again. She had stopped during the pregnancy and for the first year after Claire was born. But when Claire was old enough to stay with Michael for a few hours, Evangeline started taking short rides again. Saturday mornings, an hour or two, just to feel the wind, just to feel the engine, just to remember who she was outside of being a mother, which is something that all mothers need to do sometimes, even though the world doesn't always make it easy. Walter's voice was getting quieter now, not weaker, just quieter, the way a voice gets when it is approaching the part of the story that costs the most to tell. On a Saturday morning in October of 1991, Evangeline went for a ride, a short ride. She told Michael she'd be back by lunch. She kissed Claire on the forehead. She put on her jacket and her helmet. She started the Electra Glide. She rode out of the driveway and turned south onto the county road. Walter stopped. He looked at his hands. He looked at the window. He looked at the garage beyond the backyard. She was about 12 miles from home when a pickup truck crossed the center line on a blind curve. The driver was an old man, 81 years old. He had fallen asleep at the wheel. He crossed the center line and hit Evangeline head-on. The kitchen was completely silent. The clock had stopped ticking, or David had stopped hearing it. The afternoon light was still falling on the table, but it seemed different now. Colder, more distant. She died at the scene, Walter said. The paramedics said it was instant. She didn't suffer. That's what they always say. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if anyone can know if it's true. But that's what they said. Walter picked up his coffee cup. He took a sip. His hands were steady. His face was calm. The tears were there. David could see them, shining in the pale blue eyes. But they were not falling. They were being held. The way Walter held everything, carefully, patiently, with the quiet discipline of a man who has been carrying this weight for 33 years and has learned exactly how to hold it so that it does not crush him. Evangeline was 27 years old. Claire was 18 months old. Michael was 29. Walter set the cup down. The Electra Glide was destroyed in the accident. The frame was bent. The engine was cracked. The tank was crushed. But the saddlebags survived. And inside one of the saddlebags, the paramedics found a small notebook, Evangeline's riding journal. She kept notes about every ride she took, the date, the weather, the route, the mileage, small observations, the way the light looked on a certain hill, the way a particular curve felt at a particular speed, the smell of the fields after rain. Walter reached into his shirt pocket. He took out a small piece of paper, folded many times into a small square. He unfolded it slowly. It was old, yellow, soft with age. The creases were deep and worn from years of being folded and unfolded. "This is the last entry," Walter said. "The last thing she wrote, on the morning of the day she died." He held the paper out to David. David took it. He looked at it. The handwriting was small and neat and feminine, written in blue ink that had faded to a pale gray blue over the decades. The entry said, "Saturday, October 12th, 1991. Clear sky, cool morning, leaves turning on the ridge road, going south toward the lake. Engine sounds happy today. I love this motorcycle. I love this life. Back by lunch, E." David read it. He read it again. He read the last line again. "I love this motorcycle. I love this life." He handed the paper back to Walter. Walter folded it carefully along the old creases and put it back in his shirt pocket. The kitchen was quiet. The light was falling on the table between them. The coffee was getting cold. "After Evangeline died," Walter said, "Michael called me. He told me the motorcycle was destroyed. He asked me if I wanted any of the parts. I said yes. I wanted all of them, everything that was left. He had the wreck towed to my garage. I spent 2 weeks going through it, piece by piece, saving everything that could be saved, which wasn't much. The handlebars, a few chrome pieces, one mirror, the saddlebags, the seat which was damaged but not destroyed." Walter looked at the window again, at the garage. "Then I did something that most people would probably call crazy. I bought another 1972 Electra Glide. The same year, the same model. I found one at a dealer in Springfield. It was not midnight blue. It was black. I had it repainted, midnight blue. The exact same shade. I had the painter match the color from a photograph of Evangeline's bike. It took him 3 tries to get it right, but he got it right." Walter took a slow breath. "I took the parts I had saved from Evangeline's destroyed bike. The handlebars, the chrome pieces, the mirror, the saddlebags, the seat. And I put them on the new bike, one by one, piece by piece, fitting the old parts onto the new frame, making the new bike into the old bike, as much as I could, making it into her bike." He looked at David. "The motorcycle in my garage is not the motorcycle Evangeline rode. The frame is different. The engine is different. Most of the parts are different. But the handlebars are hers. The mirror is hers. The saddlebags are hers. The seat she sat on for 30,000 miles. The seat that is shaped by her body. The seat that I condition with leather oil every morning. That seat is hers. Walter's voice was almost a whisper now. Not because he was getting emotional, because the words he was saying were the most private words he had ever spoken to another human being. And private words, by their nature, come out quietly. I polished the motorcycle every morning because Evangeline polished it every morning. She took care of it. She kept it clean. She kept the chrome shining. She kept the leather soft. She did it every morning before she went to work, the way I do it every morning before I do anything else. I am doing what she did. I am continuing what she started. I am taking care of the thing she loved the way she took care of it. Because if I stop taking care of it, then the last piece of her daily life, the last piece of her routine, the last piece of who she was on an ordinary morning, dies too. And I am not willing to let that happen. Walter looked at David with his pale blue eyes. The tears were there, still held, still not falling. That's why I polish the motorcycle every morning, and that's why I never ride it. David waited. He did not speak. He knew there was more. I don't ride it because the last person who rode it was Evangeline. The last hands on those handlebars were her hands. The last person who sat on that seat was her. The last person who felt that engine running beneath them was her. And if I ride it, then I become the last person. My hands replace her hands. My weight replaces her weight. My ride replaces her ride. And I can't do that. I won't do that. Walter picked up his coffee cup. He took a sip. He set it down. The motorcycle is Evangeline's last ride, and I am keeping it exactly the way it was the morning she left. Clean, polished, perfect, ready to go. As if she might come back any morning and swing her leg over the seat and start the engine and ride away down the county road, the way she did 1,000 times. I know she's not coming back. I've known that for 33 years. But the motorcycle doesn't know. The motorcycle is still waiting. And as long as someone is taking care of it, the motorcycle will keep waiting. And as long as the motorcycle is waiting, some small part of Evangeline is still here. The kitchen was silent. Completely silent. The clock on the mantel had stopped. Actually stopped, David realized. The battery dead. The hands frozen at some earlier hour. The afternoon light was warm on the table. Walter's hands were wrapped around his coffee cup. David's hands were in his lap, completely still. That's the story, Walter said. That's why I polish the motorcycle every morning and never ride it. David sat with the story for a long time. He did not rush to respond. He did not offer sympathy or wisdom or any of the well-meaning but ultimately useless things that people say when they hear about the death of someone's child. He just sat with it. He let it fill the room. He let the weight of it settle into his own body, into his own chest, into the place inside him where the important stories lived. After a while, David said the only thing he could think of to say. The only thing that felt true and honest and sufficient. Thank you for telling me, Walter. Walter nodded. A small nod. The nod of a man who has just set down something very heavy that he has been carrying for a very long time, and who is feeling, for the first time in 33 years, the particular relief that comes from sharing a weight with another person. They sat in the kitchen for another hour. They drank more coffee. Walter talked more about Evangeline, about her childhood, about her first motorcycle ride, about the day she brought Michael home to meet her parents, about the day Claire was born, about the small, ordinary, beautiful details of a life that lasted 27 years and that has been lovingly preserved, piece by piece, in the chrome and the leather and the midnight blue paint of a motorcycle that sits in a garage and is polished every morning and will never be ridden again. David listened. He listened the way he taught his students to listen to history, with their whole attention, with their whole hearts, with the understanding that every story, no matter how small, is someone's entire world. The afternoon light faded slowly. The kitchen grew dim. Neither of them turned on a light. They sat in the growing darkness, two men at a kitchen table, one of them talking about his daughter and the other one listening. While outside the window, the garage stood quietly in the evening air, holding its motorcycle, holding its memory, holding its 33-year vigil for a woman who rode away one Saturday morning and never came back. David walked home that evening in the dark. The short distance between Walter's front door and his own front door, maybe 40 feet, felt longer than it had ever felt. His legs were heavy. His mind was full. The story was inside him now, the way a meal is inside a person after they have eaten it, being digested slowly, being absorbed into the body, becoming part of the person who consumed it. Rachel was in the living room when he came in. Sophie was already in bed. The house was quiet. Rachel looked up from the book she was reading. She saw David's face. She set the book down. "What happened?" she asked. David sat down on the sofa beside her. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he told her. All of it. Walter's daughter, the motorcycle, the accident, the rebuilding, the polishing, the seat that was shaped by Evangeline's body, the handlebars that were held by Evangeline's hands, the reason the motorcycle was never ridden, the reason it would never be ridden, the 33 years of daily polishing as a way of keeping a dead daughter's daily routine alive. Rachel listened without interrupting. When David was finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she reached over and took his hand. "That poor man," she said. "He's not poor," David said. "He's not pitiful. He's not broken. He's a man who found a way to hold on to his daughter, the only way he could find. And he's been doing it every morning for 33 years. Every single morning, without missing a day." Rachel was quiet again. She looked at the wall that separated their living room from Walter's house. 30 feet away on the other side of that wall, an old man was sitting alone in his kitchen in the dark, having just told his story for the first time in 33 years. "What are you going to do?" Rachel asked. "I don't know," David said. "I don't know if there's anything to do. He told me the story. Maybe that's enough. Maybe he just needed someone to hear it." "Maybe," Rachel said. "But maybe there's more." David looked at her. "What do you mean?" Rachel thought about it. She chose her words carefully, the way she always did when she was thinking about something important. "He's been alone with this for 33 years. He's been polishing that motorcycle alone every morning for 33 years. He's been carrying Evangeline's memory by himself, in his garage, in silence, with nobody watching except you through the kitchen window. Maybe what he needs is not just someone to hear the story. Maybe what he needs is someone to be present for the ritual, someone to sit in the garage with him while he polishes, not to help, not to talk, just to be there. So he's not alone with it anymore." David looked at Rachel for a long time. She was, as she often was, exactly right. The next morning, David woke up at 6:30. He made coffee. He poured 2 cups. He carried both cups out the back door, down the steps across the yard, through the gate in the fence, and across Walter's backyard to the garage. The garage door was already open. Walter was inside, crouched beside the Electra Glide, working on the right exhaust pipe with his soft white cloth. The morning light was coming through the open door at a low angle, falling on the motorcycle, making the chrome flash and the midnight blue paint glow. The radio was not on. The garage was silent except for the soft sound of the cloth on the metal and Walter's slow, steady breathing. Walter heard David's footsteps on the concrete. He looked up. He saw David standing in the garage doorway, holding 2 cups of coffee. His face registered a small surprise, a brief widening of the eyes, a slight lift of the eyebrows. And then the surprise was replaced by something else, something softer, something like gratitude, though Walter would not have used that word. "Morning," David said. "Brought you coffee." Walter looked at the coffee. He looked at David. He did not say anything for about 5 seconds. Then he straightened up slowly, set the polishing cloth on the workbench, and took the cup from David's hand. "Thank you," he said. David looked around the garage. He saw the stool beside the workbench. He walked over to it. He sat down. He took a sip of his coffee. He did not say anything else. He just sat on the stool and drank his coffee and watched Walter work. Walter looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his cloth and went back to polishing the exhaust pipe. The same slow circles, the same patient rhythm, the same careful attention to each square inch of chrome. They did not talk. For the entire 2 hours that Walter spent polishing the motorcycle that morning, they did not exchange a single word. David sat on the stool and drank his coffee, slowly, making it last. And Walter crouched and stood and moved around the motorcycle, working his way through the same sequence he had been working through every morning for 33 years. The exhaust pipes, the engine cases, the handlebar clamps, the mirrors, the saddlebag accents, the fender trim, the spokes. The only sounds were the cloth on the metal and the birds outside, and the distant sound of the neighborhood waking up. A car starting somewhere down the street, a dog barking once, the faint hiss of a sprinkler turning on in someone's yard. When Walter finished, he stepped back from the motorcycle and looked at it. The same slow, careful look he always gave it at the end of the polishing. He set the cloth on the workbench. He picked up his coffee cup. The coffee was cold now, but he took a sip anyway. He looked at David. "Same time tomorrow?" Walter asked. It was the most words Walter had spoken to initiate anything in the 2 years David had known him. "Same time tomorrow," David said. And that was how it began. Every morning at 6:45, David walked across the backyard with 2 cups of coffee and sat on the stool in Walter's garage and watched Walter polish the Electra Glide. They did not talk much. Some mornings they exchanged a few words about the weather, about the neighborhood, about something Sophie had said or done that David found amusing and that Walter listened to with that particular soft attentiveness that he reserved for stories about children. Some mornings they said nothing at all. They just sat in the garage together, 2 men and a motorcycle in the morning light, sharing the silence. The silence was different now than it had been before. Before David knew the story, the silence around Walter's polishing had been a mystery, a closed door, an unanswered question, a blank space that David's curiosity had been trying to fill. Now that David knew the story, the silence was something else entirely. It was not empty. It was full of Evangeline, full of the memory of a woman who had loved this motorcycle and had taken care of it every morning, and had ridden it 30,000 miles through the Ozark Hills, and had died on it at the age of 27. The silence was a memorial, and David, by sitting in it every morning, was participating in the memorial. He was not just watching the polishing anymore. He was attending it, the way a person attends a ceremony, with respect, with attention, with the understanding that what is happening in front of them is not ordinary. Over the weeks and months that followed, the morning ritual expanded slightly, not dramatically. Walter was not a man who welcomed dramatic changes. But small things shifted. Sophie began to join them sometimes. Not every morning. She had school and she was 7. And 7-year-olds do not naturally gravitate towards sitting quietly in a garage at 6:45 in the morning. But on weekends and on summer mornings when school was out, Sophie would walk across the yard with her father and sit on the garage floor with her legs crossed and watch Walter polish the motorcycle. Sophie was not quiet. Sophie was the opposite of quiet. She asked questions constantly. Walter, who had spent 33 years in silence, found himself answering questions from a 7-year-old girl with a patience and a warmth that surprised everyone, including himself. "Mr. Novak, why do you polish the spokes one at a time?" "Because each spoke holds the wheel together. If one spoke is weak, the whole wheel is weak. So each one deserves attention." "Mr. Novak, what's that part called?" "That's the rocker cover. It covers the valves that open and close to let air and fuel into the engine." "Mr. Novak, why is the motorcycle named Evangeline?" Walter paused when Sophie asked this question. He was crouched beside the engine, polishing a chrome piece near the base of the cylinder. He stopped polishing. He looked at Sophie. She was sitting on the garage floor with her legs crossed and her chin in her hands, looking at him with the open, honest curiosity that children bring to every question, without any awareness that some questions carry more weight than others. "Because Evangeline was someone I loved very much," Walter said. "Who was she?" "She was my daughter." "Where is she now?" "She's in heaven." Sophie thought about this for a moment. She looked at the motorcycle. "Does she know you polish her motorcycle every morning?" Walter was quiet for a long time. The question, asked innocently without any intent to wound, landed inside him in a place that was still tender after all these years. He looked at the motorcycle. He looked at the chrome piece in his hand. He looked at the cloth. "I think she does," Walter said. "I like to think she does." Sophie nodded, satisfied with this answer. She uncrossed her legs and recrossed them and went back to watching the polishing. She did not ask any more questions about Evangeline. She did not need to. She had received the answer she was looking for, and the answer was sufficient, because Sophie was 7 years old, and at 7 years old, the idea that someone in heaven can see you polishing their motorcycle is not a comforting fiction, but a simple and obvious truth. Walter went back to polishing. But something in his posture had changed. His shoulders were slightly more relaxed. His movements were slightly more open. As if Sophie's question and the simple, honest answer he had given had loosened something inside him that had been tight for a very long time. David noticed. David noticed everything that happened in the garage during the morning polishing, because David was a history teacher, and history teachers are trained to notice the small details that most people miss. He noticed the shift in Walter's shoulders. He noticed the slight softening of Walter's face. He noticed the way Walter glanced at Sophie every few minutes as he worked, with the particular expression that people get when they are in the presence of a child who reminds them of another child who is no longer there. Over the following months, a small, quiet community formed around Walter's morning polishing. It was not a community that anyone planned or organized or even acknowledged. It just happened. David came every morning with coffee. Sophie came on weekends and summer mornings. Rachel came occasionally bringing muffins or banana bread. The neighbor on the other side of Walter's house, an older woman named Mrs. Perkins, who had lived on the street for almost as long as Walter, began stopping by the open garage door on her morning walk to say hello and to stand for a few minutes watching the polishing before continuing on her way. None of them helped with the polishing. That was Walter's work. That was Walter's ritual. Nobody touched the motorcycle except Walter. But they were present. They were there. They were witnesses to the act of love that happened in the garage every morning, and their presence changed the quality of the act, not by making it bigger or louder or more dramatic, by making it less alone. Walter did not talk about Evangeline often. He did not tell her story to Mrs. Perkins or to Rachel or to anyone else who stopped by the garage. The story had been told once, to David, and once was enough. But the story was present in the garage anyway, the way gravity is present, the way light is present. Everyone who spent time in the garage could feel it. They could feel it in the careful, slow circles of the cloth on the chrome. They could feel it in the way Walter's hands moved over the leather seat. They could feel it in the particular quality of attention that Walter brought to every surface of the motorcycle. The attention of a father caring for the last physical trace of his daughter's daily life. One morning in August, about 3 months after David had started coming to the garage, Sophie arrived with something in her hand, a piece of paper, a drawing. She had made it the night before, at the kitchen table with her crayons and her colored pencils and the particular fierce concentration that she brought to all of her art projects. She walked into the garage and held the drawing out to Walter. Walter set down his cloth. He took the drawing. He looked at it. It was a picture of the motorcycle, the Electra Glide. Sophie had drawn it carefully, with the attention to detail that she had developed over many mornings of watching the polishing. The dark blue tank, the chrome pipes, the leather seat, the windshield, the saddlebags. She'd even drawn the small dent in the floor where the kickstand rested. The drawing was not perfect. It was the drawing of a 7-year-old, with the proportions slightly off and the lines slightly wobbly. But it was recognizable. It was clearly the Electra Glide. It was clearly drawn by someone who had spent a lot of time looking at it. But it was the detail at the top of the drawing that made Walter stop breathing for a moment. Above the motorcycle, in the sky of the picture, Sophie had drawn a woman, a small figure with dark hair and a smile, floating in the blue crayon sky above the motorcycle, looking down at it. The woman had wings, small wings drawn in yellow crayon, coming out of her shoulders. Below the drawing, in Sophie's careful second-grade handwriting, were the words, "Evangeline watching her motorcycle from heaven." Walter held the drawing in both hands. He looked at it for a very long time. His hands trembled slightly. His jaw tightened. His pale blue eyes filled with tears, the same tears that he had been holding for 33 years, the same tears that he had held in the kitchen when he told David the story, the same tears that had been building behind the wall of his silence since the October morning in 1991 when a phone call from Michael had ended one version of his life and begun another. The tears fell. For the first time in 33 years, Walter Novak cried. Not loudly, not dramatically. He cried the way a man cries when he has been holding the tears for so long that they come out not in a rush but in a slow, steady flow. The way water flows from a spring that has finally broken through the surface of the earth after years of pressure. The tears ran down his lined, weathered face and dripped off his chin and fell on the drawing in his hands, making small dark circles on Sophie's blue crayon sky. Sophie watched Walter cry. She did not look frightened. She did not look confused. She looked at him with the calm, steady gaze of a child who understands in her own simple way that some tears are not sad tears. Some tears are the tears that come when something that has been locked inside a person for a very long time is finally set free. She stepped forward. She put her small arms around Walter's waist. She hugged him, the way she had hugged him that first day, when she sat on the motorcycle, simply, naturally, without hesitation, with the uncomplicated love that children give to the people they have decided to care about. Walter put one hand on Sophie's head. His other hand held the drawing. He stood in his garage in the morning light, crying and being hugged by a 7-year-old girl with a drawing of a motorcycle and an angel in his hand, and the real motorcycle sitting behind them, midnight blue and chrome, clean and polished and perfect, waiting, as it had been waiting for 33 years, for the woman who would never ride it again. David stood by the workbench and watched. He did not move. He did not speak. He just watched, with the full attention of a man who understood that what he was seeing was one of the most important moments he would ever witness. A moment of release, a moment of healing, a moment when the long, lonely vigil of an old man and a motorcycle was finally, gently, tenderly interrupted by the love of a child who had walked into his garage one afternoon to see a pretty motorcycle and had stayed to become the thing that Walter had been missing for 33 years without knowing he was missing it. A witness, a companion, a small warm presence in the cold quiet space where the grief lived. After a while, Walter stopped crying. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. He looked at the drawing again. He looked at Sophie. "This is the most beautiful thing anyone has ever given me," he said. His voice was rough and wet and raw. "You can put it on your wall," Sophie said, "in the garage, so Evangeline can watch you polish every morning." Walter nodded. He walked to the pegboard above the workbench. He took a small tack from a tin on the shelf. He pinned the drawing to the pegboard at eye level next to the wrenches and the screwdriver and the pliers. He stepped back. He looked at the drawing on the pegboard. The blue motorcycle. The dark-haired woman with wings in the sky above it. The words in second-grade handwriting. Evangeline watching her motorcycle from heaven. He looked at the drawing for a long time. Then he picked up his cloth and went back to polishing. But something was different now. The polishing was the same slow circles, the same careful attention, the same patient rhythm. But the quality of the air in the garage had changed. The loneliness had thinned. The silence had softened. The vigil was no longer a vigil of one. It was a vigil of several. An old man and a history teacher, and a 7-year-old girl and a woman named Mrs. Perkins, who stopped by on her morning walk. A small congregation of quiet people, gathered in a small garage around a midnight blue motorcycle, in the service of a memory. And on the pegboard above the workbench, a crayon drawing of an angel watched over all of them, smiling with small yellow wings from a blue crayon sky. The drawing stayed on the pegboard through the summer and into the autumn, and through the winter and into the following spring, through the heat and the cold and the dry desert air that seeped into the garage from the Missouri countryside. The crayon colors faded slightly over the months, the way crayons do when they are exposed to light and air for a long time. The blue of the motorcycle becoming a slightly paler blue, the yellow of the wings becoming a slightly softer yellow, the dark hair of the angel becoming a slightly lighter brown. But the drawing stayed. Walter did not take it down. He did not move it. He did not cover it or protect it with glass or plastic. He let it age naturally the way everything in the garage aged naturally. The motorcycle, the tools, the workbench, the concrete floor, the old man himself, everything aging slowly together in the same small space, at the same slow pace. Sophie made more drawings over the months, not every week, but regularly. She would arrive at the garage on a Saturday morning with a new piece of paper, and she would hand it to Walter, and Walter would look at it with the same slow, careful attention he gave to the motorcycle, and then he would pin it to the pegboard next to the first one. By the end of the first year, there were 7 drawings on the pegboard, each one different. Each one drawn by a 7-year-old girl, then an 8-year-old girl as Sophie's birthday passed in November, with crayons and colored pencils, and the particular creative confidence of a child who has found an audience that genuinely appreciates her work. One drawing showed the motorcycle from the side, with Walter standing beside it, holding his polishing cloth. Another showed the motorcycle from the front, with the headlight drawn as a large, bright yellow circle. Another showed the garage itself, the concrete block walls, the workbench, the pegboard, the overhead light, the motorcycle in the center, and 3 small figures standing near the door that Sophie had labeled me and Dad and Mr. Novak. Another showed the motorcycle riding on a road through green hills, with a woman riding it, dark hair streaming behind her, and the words Evangeline's Saturday Ride written below in careful letters. Walter looked at each drawing for a long time before he pinned it up. He studied the details. He noticed the things that Sophie had gotten right: the shape of the tank, the curve of the exhaust pipes, the angle of the windshield. He noticed the things she had gotten slightly wrong: the number of spokes in the wheels, the position of the mirrors, the shape of the saddlebags. He did not correct her. He did not point out the mistakes. He understood that the drawings were not technical illustrations. They were acts of love, and acts of love do not need to be accurate. They just need to be sincere. The morning routine continued. David came every day with coffee. Sophie came on weekends and summer mornings and school holidays. Walter polished. The garage filled slowly with the accumulated warmth of daily shared presence. The silence between the 3 of them, and sometimes 4, when Rachel came with muffins, and sometimes 5, when Mrs. Perkins stopped on her walk, was not the silence of people who have nothing to say. It was the silence of people who have said the important things and are now comfortable simply being together without the need for more words. Walter began to change, not dramatically, not suddenly. The changes were so gradual that they were almost invisible, noticeable only to someone who was paying very close attention over a long period of time. But David was paying attention. David had been paying attention since the first morning he stood at his kitchen window and watched Walter open the garage door. And David noticed the changes. Walter smiled more, not a lot more. Walter was never going to be a man who smiled frequently. But the small smiles came more often now, when Sophie said something funny, when David made a dry observation about the weather, when Mrs. Perkins told a story about her cat. The smiles were small and brief and genuine, and each one was a tiny crack in the long, quiet mask that Walter had been wearing for 33 years. Walter talked more. Again, not a lot more. But the short sentences became slightly longer. The 1-word answers became 2-word answers, and sometimes 3-word answers, and occasionally, on particularly good mornings, small paragraphs. He talked about the weather. He talked about the neighborhood. He talked very occasionally about Evangeline, a memory that surfaced during the polishing, a detail about her childhood, a small story about something she had said or done that Walter wanted to share with someone. These stories were rare. They came without warning. They lasted about 30 seconds, and then they were over, and Walter went back to polishing, and the garage went back to its comfortable silence. Walter began to accept invitations. This was perhaps the most significant change of all. For the first 12 years of David's time on the street, Walter had not accepted a single invitation to anything. He did not come to the neighborhood 4th of July cookout. He did not come to the annual Christmas party at Mrs. Perkins' house. He did not come to Sophie's birthday parties. He politely declined every invitation with the same quiet firmness, and nobody pressed him, because everyone understood that Walter was a man who preferred to be alone. But in the autumn, after David started coming to the garage, Walter accepted an invitation. Rachel had invited him to Thanksgiving dinner. She had asked casually at the fence, expecting the usual polite decline. But Walter had been quiet for a moment, and then he had said, very simply, "Thank you. I'd like that." Rachel had come inside and told David, and David had looked at her with an expression of genuine surprise, because in 2 years of living next door to Walter, this was the first time the old man had agreed to enter their house for any reason other than to return a piece of mail that the postman had accidentally put in the wrong mailbox. Walter came to Thanksgiving dinner. He wore a clean white shirt and a pair of dark trousers, and he brought a bottle of wine, a red wine, not expensive, purchased from the grocery store in town. He sat at the table with David and Rachel and Sophie and Rachel's mother, who had driven in from Kansas City for the holiday. He ate turkey and mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce and pumpkin pie. He was quiet for most of the meal, but he was present. He was there. He was sitting at a table with other people, eating warm food, listening to conversation, being part of something. Sophie sat next to him. She talked to him throughout the meal, in the easy, non-stop way that children talk to adults they are comfortable with. She told him about her school, about her best friend Emma, about the book she was reading, about the drawing she was planning to make for him next. A Christmas drawing with the motorcycle wearing a Santa hat. Walter listened to all of it with his usual quiet attention, nodding at the right moments, asking a small question here and there, letting Sophie's bright voice fill the space around him. At the end of the meal, after the pie, after the coffee, Walter stood up and thanked Rachel for the dinner. He thanked David. He looked at Sophie. "Thank you for sitting next to me," he said. "You're welcome, Mr. Novak," Sophie said. "You can sit next to me every time." Walter smiled, one of his real smiles, the kind that reached his eyes. He walked home across the yard, through the gate, to his own house. David watched him from the kitchen window. Walter walked slowly, the way he always walked, but there was something different about the walk tonight. Something lighter. Something that might have been, if David was not imagining it, the slightest suggestion of a man who was carrying less weight than he had been carrying that morning. The Thanksgivings continued. Every year. Walter came every year. He always brought the same bottle of red wine from the grocery store. He always wore the same white shirt and dark trousers. He always sat next to Sophie. The meal became a tradition. The way the morning polishing was a tradition. A small, reliable ritual that held the days together and gave them shape. Other small traditions formed. Walter began joining David and Sophie for Saturday morning walks to the park. Walter began accepting Rachel's invitations to Sunday dinners. Walter began sitting on his front porch in the evenings and waving to neighbors who walked past instead of sitting on the back porch where nobody could see him. Small changes. Tiny changes. But each one was a small step out of the isolation that had surrounded Walter for 3 decades. Sophie grew. The way children grow, quickly, visibly in a way that adults notice mostly when they look at photographs from a year ago and realize how much has changed. She turned 8, then 9, then 10. Her drawings became more sophisticated. Her conversations became more complex. Her understanding of Walter's story, the parts she knew, which were not all the parts, deepened as her own capacity for empathy deepened. On the morning of Sophie's 10th birthday, She walked into the garage with a gift for Walter. Not a drawing this time. A small wooden frame, purchased with her own allowance money from the craft store in town. Inside the frame, she had placed the very first drawing she had made for Walter, the one of Evangeline watching her motorcycle from heaven. She had carefully removed it from the pegboard, smoothed out the tack holes, and mounted it in the frame with small pieces of tape. She handed it to Walter. He took it. He looked at it for a long time. The faded crayon colors, the wobbly lines, the small figure with dark hair and yellow wings floating in the blue sky above the motorcycle. The words in second-grade handwriting that were now the handwriting of a younger version of the girl standing in front of him. "Now it won't fade anymore," Sophie said. "The glass will protect it." Walter looked at Sophie. He looked at the framed drawing. He looked at the pegboard where the drawing had been hanging for almost 3 years. The small rectangular spot where the drawing had been was slightly lighter than the surrounding pegboard, the way a wall is slightly lighter behind a picture that has been hanging in the same place for a long time. "Thank you, Sophie," Walter said. His voice was rough but steady. He hung the framed drawing on the pegboard in the exact same spot where the unframed version had been. The frame fit perfectly. The drawing looked different behind glass, more permanent, more official, more like something that mattered, which it did. It mattered more than almost anything else on the pegboard, more than the wrenches and the screwdrivers and the pliers, more than any tool that had ever hung there. Walter went back to polishing the motorcycle. Sophie sat on the garage floor and watched. David sat on the stool and drank his coffee. The morning light came through the open door and fell on the chrome and the blue paint and the framed drawing and the 3 people in the small garage, and everything was exactly as it should be. The years continued, the way years do, slowly and quickly at the same time. The neighborhood changed around Walter's house, new families moving in, old families moving out, the old maple tree between the properties growing taller, the street being repaved, the old chain-link fence being replaced with a new wooden one that David and Walter built together over a weekend in the spring. The world changed outside the neighborhood. New presidents, new wars, new technologies, new problems that felt urgent and important, and that would eventually be replaced by other problems that felt equally urgent and equally important. The world kept turning. The seasons kept cycling. The mornings kept coming. And every morning at 6:45, Walter opened the garage door and polished the motorcycle. The routine never changed. Not once. Not in all the years that David knew him. The chrome polish, the leather conditioner, or the wax, the glass cleaner, the brush, the compressed air. Every surface, every morning, without exception. But the context around the routine changed. The garage was no longer a solitary place. The garage was a gathering place, a small, quiet community center for a small, quiet neighborhood. A place where people came not because they needed anything, but because they wanted to be near something that was being done with love. Walter turned 80. David and Rachel threw him a small birthday party in the backyard, just the immediate neighbors. A few people from Walter's old factory, and Sophie, who was now 15, and who gave Walter a new drawing. This one wasn't done in crayon. It was done in charcoal pencil, on good paper, with the skill and confidence of a teenager who had been taking art classes at school, and who had real talent. The drawing showed the Electra Glide in profile, detailed and precise, every spoke visible, every chrome accent rendered, the midnight blue captured in shades of gray that somehow suggested the color without using it. Above the motorcycle in the sky was the same figure, a woman with dark hair and small wings. but drawn now with the sophistication and emotional depth that a 15-year-old could bring to a subject she'd been drawing since she was 7. Walter hung this drawing in the garage, too, next to the framed original. Walter turned 82, then 83, then 84. His body slowed, his knees were worse, his back was stiffer. The crouching beside the exhaust pipes, which had once been effortless, now required a slow, careful descent and an even slower, careful ascent, with one hand bracing against the workbench for support. The polishing took longer, 2.5 hours now, sometimes 3. But the quality never diminished. Every surface was still polished to perfection. Every piece of chrome still gleamed. Every inch of leather was still conditioned. The motorcycle looked exactly the same as it had looked the first morning David had watched through his kitchen window years ago. David helped more now. Not with the polishing, that was still Walter's alone, but with the things around the polishing. He opened the garage door so Walter didn't have to bend down to the handle. He set up the workbench so that Walter's supplies were within easy reach. He brought a small heater for the cold winter mornings so that Walter's hands would not stiffen too much to work. Small accommodations, small kindnesses, the kind of things a person does for someone they care about, without being asked and without expecting thanks. On a Tuesday morning in March, when Walter was 85 years old, David walked across the yard with 2 cups of coffee and found the garage door still closed. He set the cups down on the back step. He walked to the garage. He knocked on the door. No answer. He walked to the house. He knocked on the back door. No answer. He walked around to the front. He knocked on the front door. No answer. He tried the handle. The door was unlocked. He pushed it open. Walter, the house was quiet. The clock on the mantel was ticking. The morning light was coming through the white curtains. David walked through the living room to the hallway, to the bedroom. The bedroom door was open. Walter was in bed, on his side, facing the window. His eyes were closed. His face was calm. His hands were resting on the blanket, one on top of the other, the way they always rested, carefully, quietly, in the particular position of a man who knew exactly where his hands belonged. David stood in the doorway for a long time. He did not need to check. He could see from the stillness of Walter's chest and the particular quality of the silence in the room that Walter was gone. He had died in his sleep, sometime during the night, peacefully, it seemed, without struggle, without pain, the way a man dies when his body has finally decided, after 85 years of faithful service, that it has done enough. David walked to the bed. He sat on the edge. He put his hand on Walter's hand. The hand was cool. The skin was soft. The knuckles were knobby and rough from decades of work. The hand of a machinist. The hand of a polisher. The hand that had spent 2 hours every morning for 33 years, moving a soft white cloth in slow, careful circles over the chrome and the paint and the leather of a motorcycle that he never rode. David sat with Walter for a long time. He did not cry. Not yet. The crying would come later, that evening at the kitchen table with Rachel, when the full weight of Walter's absence finally settled into the space where Walter had been. But right now, David just sat with him. The way he had sat with Walter in the garage for years. Quietly, patiently, without hurry, without the need for words. After a while, David stood up. He walked to the kitchen. He called the necessary numbers. He did the necessary things. The morning moved forward in the particular mechanical way that mornings move forward when someone has died, and the world needs to be informed. The funeral was small. A few neighbors, a few people from Walter's old factory, Mrs. Perkins, Rachel, Sophie, who was now 16 and who cried quietly through the entire service, the minister who had never met Walter but who spoke kindly about him based on what David had told him. The cemetery where Walter was buried was a small one at the edge of town. The same kind of small cemetery where Earl Pritchard and his wife Dorothy were buried in Arizona, hundreds of miles away, in another story that none of these people had ever heard. Walter's will was simple. The house was to be sold. The proceeds were to go to a scholarship fund at the local high school for students interested in mechanical trades. The furniture was to be donated. The books were to go to the library. The motorcycle was to go to David, not to be sold, not to be donated, not to be displayed in a museum. To David, with a single instruction, written in Walter's small, careful handwriting on a piece of paper that his lawyer had kept in a file for the last several years. David, please take care of Evangeline. Polish her every morning if you can. But if you can't, just make sure someone does. She doesn't like to be alone. Walter. David read the note. He read it twice. He folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. He walked across the yard to Walter's garage. He opened the door. The springs groaned. The morning light flooded in. The Electra Glide sat in the center of the floor, midnight blue and chrome. Perfect. Still. Waiting. On the pegboard above the workbench, Sophie's drawings hung in their places. The framed original, Evangeline watching her motorcycle from heaven, was in the center. The charcoal drawing was beside it. The other drawings surrounded them like a small gallery of a young girl's growing talent and a young girl's growing love for an old man and his motorcycle. David walked to the workbench. He picked up the first cloth, the soft, white cotton cloth that Walter used for the chrome. He picked up the can of Mother's chrome polish. He shook it gently. He applied a small amount to the cloth. He crouched beside the right exhaust pipe. His knees popped softly. He began to move the cloth in slow, careful circles, starting at the engine and working toward the rear, the same way Walter did it, the same direction, the same pressure, the same pace. The chrome began to glow under the cloth, the way it had glowed every morning for 33 years under Walter's hands, the way it had glowed every morning for 3 years before that under Evangeline's hands, the way it would glow tomorrow morning, and the morning after that, and the morning after that, for as long as someone was willing to pick up the cloth and do the slow, patient work of keeping the chrome alive. David polished the exhaust pipes, then the engine cases, then the handlebar clamps, then the mirrors, then the saddlebag accents, then the fender trim, then the spokes one at a time, 40 per wheel, 80 total. It took him about 2 hours, the same amount of time it took Walter. When he was finished, David stepped back and looked at the motorcycle. The same slow, careful look that Walter had given it every morning. The look of a person making sure that every surface was as clean and as bright as it could be. Everything was in order. Everything was exactly as it should be. David put the cloth back on the workbench. He put the polish back in its place. He stood in the garage for a few more minutes, looking at the motorcycle, looking at the drawings on the pegboard, looking at the morning light falling on the chrome and the blue paint, and the leather seat that was shaped by the body of a woman who had been dead for 33 years, but whose presence was still here, in every surface, in every reflection, in every square inch of polished chrome. Sophie appeared in the garage doorway. She was wearing her school clothes. Her backpack was over one shoulder. She'd come to say goodbye to Walter's garage on her way to school. She saw her father standing beside the motorcycle with the polishing cloth in his hand. She saw the wet streak on the exhaust pipe where the polish had just been applied. She understood immediately. "You're going to keep polishing," she said. Not a question, a statement. "Every morning," David said. Sophie walked into the garage. She stood beside the motorcycle. She touched the fuel tank with her fingertips very gently, the way she had touched it the first time she saw it, when she was 7 years old, before she knew the story, before she knew the name, before she knew anything except that the motorcycle was beautiful and the old man who cared for it was kind. "Can I help sometimes?" she asked. "You can help anytime you want." Sophie nodded. She adjusted her backpack. She looked at the framed drawing on the pegboard. Her first drawing, the one she had made when she was 7, the one with the angel and the yellow wings and the blue crayon sky. "She's still watching," Sophie said. David looked at the drawing, the faded crayon woman with the dark hair and the small wings, floating above the motorcycle, smiling, watching everything that happened in the garage below. "She's still watching," David said. Sophie walked out of the garage and down the driveway and turned left towards school, her backpack swinging gently, her footsteps getting softer as she moved away. David stood in the garage and listened to her footsteps until they disappeared. Then he listened to the silence. The same silence that had filled this garage for 33 years. The same silence that was made of grief and love and memory, and the soft metallic echo of a wind chime that was no longer there, but that you could still hear if you listened carefully enough. David pulled the garage door down. The springs groaned. The door settled into its frame. The small glass windows at the top let a few rectangles of morning light fall on the motorcycle, on the tank and the windshield and the chrome pipes, the same rectangles of light that had fallen on the same motorcycle in the same garage at the same time of morning for 33 years. Tomorrow morning at 6:45, David would open the garage door again. He would pick up the cloth. He would begin the slow, careful circles on the chrome. He would continue the ritual that Evangeline started, and Walter continued, and that David would continue now, for as long as he was able, and that Sophie would continue after David, if she chose to, because the ritual was bigger than any one person, and the love inside it was stronger than any one lifetime. The motorcycle would be polished. The chrome would gleam. The midnight blue paint would glow. The leather seat shaped by Evangeline's body, conditioned every morning for decades, would stay soft and warm and alive. And on the pegboard above the workbench, a crayon angel with yellow wings would watch over all of it from a blue crayon sky, smiling the smile of a daughter who knows she is still loved, still remembered, still cared for, every morning without fail, by the people she left behind. Good night. Sleep well. The garage is quiet now. The motorcycle is resting. The chrome is gleaming softly in the dark, catching the faint light from the small glass windows in the garage door. And somewhere, in the silence of the garage, in the stillness of the night, in the deep, quiet place where love, lives after the people who carried it are gone, the sound of a soft cloth moving in slow circles on polished chrome is still echoing, very softly, very gently forever. Good night.